Live View on the D7000 allows you to display a real-time video image on the LCD monitor instead of using the normal optical viewfinder to compose your photos. Now, some people say they like Live View, but I'm not a big fan. Why? Because Live View makes it harder to hold the camera steady. It makes focusing more difficult. It uses a lot of battery power, and since the LCD monitor doesn't swivel, Live View isn't even that helpful when it comes to shooting from high or low angles. Like all SLR cameras, the D7000 comes with an excellent optical viewfinder, and that's what I recommend you use most of the time. However, it is necessary to understand how Live View works if you want to record videos with the D7000. Because Live View and the movie mode are essentially the same thing. To turn on Live View, you just flip the Live View switch, and the camera is ready to go almost instantly. But now, the regular optical viewfinder is blacked out and can't be used in the Live View mode. To take a photo, I could press the shutter release button, or to start recording a video, I could press the movie record button. Compared to tiny point-and-shoot cameras that shoot video and consumer-grade camcorders, the D7000 delivers greatly improved picture quality, the ability to shoot with very shallow depth of field, and of course, many lens options to stretch your creative wings. One thing I really appreciate about video from the D7000 is that there are no tapes to transfer. And unlike most tapeless video camcorders, the video files that the D7000 records are just regular QuickTime movie files that are easy to play back on any computer and/or edit with most of the popular video editing programs. And don't forget that the camera includes an HDMI terminal to display crisp, clear images on a high-definition TV. The layout of the shooting information display screen that we see here is just one of 5 different options. You can cycle through them all by pressing the Info button. If you're going to be shooting movies, this is the display I recommend because it crops off the areas at the top and bottom of the screen that won't be recorded with a movie file. A lot of the information shown here will look familiar to you, and most of the settings can be changed the same way as when you're not using Live View. For example, if you want to change the white balance, you just hold down the white balance button and rotate the main command dial. Even exposure compensation can be used in Live View mode. Just hold down the exposure compensation button located on the top of the camera and then rotate the main command dial. This little icon tells you if the compensation is positive or negative. Plus, you can see any changes as they happen right on the monitor. Unfortunately, there's no live histogram to help you determine the right exposure. Over here, these numbers indicate the maximum possible length of a movie file, and they'll start counting down as soon as the movie record button is pressed. The maximum continuous recording time can never be more than 20 minutes. And sometimes, for example, if you don't have very much space left on your memory card, the maximum length might even be less than that. Next, this display shows the movie quality settings. Let's press the menu button and go see the options that the D7000 offers. All of the movie-related shooting menus are conveniently grouped together under this menu called Movie Settings. The first submenu, Movie Quality, is where you can designate the movie frame size and frame rate. There are 8 choices, and although each of them has their own merits, and it's great to have this many choices, the one I recommend is the first one, 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames per second, with the least amount of compression. Why is that the one I recommend? Well, because only 1920 by 1080 can be called Full HD. So that eliminates everything below these 2 choices. And why shoot movies with anything other than the best possible picture quality? So that eliminates this one. The microphone submenu gives you 5 choices for controlling the sound recording. You can even turn it off if you don't want to record any sound. I recommend leaving this on auto because there's no way to set the recording levels accurately, and there's not even a headphone jack to monitor the sound. And speaking of the built-in microphone, although it's convenient, it isn't very good. It isn't stereo and will always pick up the sound of the lens focusing and other handling noise anytime you touch the camera. If you want to get better audio with your video, an accessory microphone, such as this Rode Stereo video mic, would be a good investment. It attaches easily to the hot shoe, and the cord plugs right into the side of the camera. The Destination submenu allows you to tell the camera where you want your movies to be recorded. The camera even gives you an estimate of how much movie recording capacity remains on each of the 2 cards. The final submenu allows advanced photographers the ability to control the movie exposure settings completely manually. Now, if you're just shooting movies for fun and you don't really care too much about trying to get professional results, you can leave this menu turned off. But if you do want to shoot professional caliber movies, you'll want to turn the manual movie settings menu on, and also use the manual setting on the mode dial. This combination of settings is the only way you will be in complete control of shutter speed, aperture, and ISO. With any other combination of settings on the camera, sometimes it might appear that you're in control, but you're really not. So let me repeat, you can only control shutter speed, aperture, and ISO manually at the same time if the mode dial is set on manual, and the manual movie settings menu is turned on. So why is controlling ISO, shutter speed, and aperture so important? Well, partly so you can keep creative control over the movies you're shooting, but also because you don't want any of the exposure settings to fluctuate while a movie is being recorded. And that will happen all the time if you don't use manual exposure. For example, take a look at this movie. Notice how the automatic exposure keeps fluctuating up and down, and thus ruining what might otherwise be a nice shot. And here's what it looks like with manual exposure. Notice how much more professional the clip looks with a consistent, steady exposure. So here's how to set the exposure manually, if that's how you decide you want to shoot movies with the D7000. First, rotate the mode dial to M. Second, make sure Live View is turned off. Third, make sure the manual movie settings menu has been turned on. Fourth, rotate the sub-command dial on the front of the camera to choose whatever aperture you want to use. Whenever possible, I try to shoot with the lens set to its maximum aperture, so I get the shallowest depth of field, which is one of the biggest advantages of shooting video with an SLR. Fifth, flip the Live View switch to turn the Live View mode back on. Now, it's important to note that we set the aperture before turning Live View on. Why? Because even with the manual exposure settings that we've chosen, you cannot change the aperture while Live View is turned on. You must set the aperture first. Step 6. Rotate the main command dial to set the shutter speed, but be careful not to choose a shutter speed that is too fast. Now, this is a concept where a lot of photographers with limited experience shooting video have trouble. When you're shooting movies, shutter speed is not to be used to vary the exposure because it will have unwanted side effects. The shutter speed should be set once and then left alone. Although shutter speed on the D7000 can go as fast as 1/8,000th, you don't want to go anywhere near that speed. When you're shooting video, a certain amount of motion blur is necessary to get natural-looking images, and choosing a shutter speed that is too fast will cause motion in your video to have an unwanted strobing look, because each individual frame will be too sharp. I recommend choosing a shutter speed between 1/50th and 1/80th if you want natural-looking motion in your movies. And finally, step 7. You can set the ISO by holding down the ISO button and rotating the main command dial. The lower the ISO, the better your images will look. So I recommend choosing ISO 100 whenever possible. But if there isn't enough light, even with the lens wide open, then you'll need to increase the ISO as necessary to get the exposure you need. However, if you've got the opposite problem and there's too much light, even at ISO 100, then you'll need to exit the live view mode, choose a smaller aperture, and then turn live view back on. As I said before, I strongly recommend that you do not raise the shutter speed to adjust the exposure. So once the appropriate movie menu settings have been selected and the proper exposure has been set, it's time to think about focus. Now, before I describe the various options for automatic focusing, let me say that your best choice might be to not use any of them. If you really want to shoot professional caliber video with the D7000, I suggest you learn to focus the lens manually, because the camera is incapable of focusing smoothly like a normal video camcorder, no matter which option you choose. However, with that said, let's take a look at the autofocusing options. The first step is to make sure the autofocus mode selector is set to AF. Then you can hold down the autofocus mode button while you rotate the main command dial. There are only two choices: single servo for stationary subjects and full-time servo for moving subjects. With AFF, autofocus automatically begins after live view is activated, and the camera will track focus continuously. Next, we need to choose an autofocus area mode. This time we have 4 choices: face priority, wide area, normal area, and subject tracking. With face priority, the camera can recognize up to 35 faces at a time and then focus on the face that it determines to be nearest. Even if people in the frame move, the camera will continue tracking and refocusing. Wide area is a good all-around choice for a variety of subjects, both moving and stationary. It's especially useful for handheld shooting. On the other hand, normal area offers you pinpoint precision when focusing on a specific part of the frame. This mode is ideal when you're using a tripod. And finally, with subject tracking, the D7000 memorizes a subject and then automatically tracks it whenever it moves. Even if the subject momentarily leaves the frame, the camera should start tracking again once the subject re-enters. When I'm not using manual focus to shoot video, this is my favorite autofocus mode. When you combine subject tracking autofocus with AFF, you get a pretty good autofocus system. It isn't perfect, but it's better than any other digital SLR I have ever used. So those are just a few easy-to-follow steps to make your movie shooting more successful. But you shouldn't expect to get broadcast quality results the first time out. Shooting HD video with the D7000 is fun, but it can also be a bit challenging, even for experienced SLR photographers. So like anything in photography, practice makes perfect. And there's just no substitute for getting out and finding the settings and techniques that will work best for you.